So is that everything you hoped for?
Jury's still out. But man, can't deny that view.
Come on, this way.
The Last of Us Part 1 review, the definitive way to play one of the best games ever made. There's an interesting difference in the way that game fans and movie fans discuss home releases. While releasing the same film a multitude of times on VHS, then DVD, then HD DVD, then Blu-ray, and then UHD Blu-ray is an accepted practice, in games the sheer idea of releasing The Last of Us for a third time in just over a decade has generated a level of anger and dismissal that seems strange for what is one of the most critically beloved games ever made. There are legitimate holes that one could poke in the idea of A Last of Us Part 1. For one, the price is a lot for any game, no less one that you probably own in some form. It's also worth noting that it's arguably a lesser package than the PS3 or PS4 versions, as it's missing multiplayer, although we don't count that against it as the Last of Us multiplayer project is currently in development. But it's in the third camp that we find our biggest difference in opinion, the idea that it's a pointless remake and that it's barely different from the PS4 version. The Last of Us Part 1 isn't a pointless remake. The Last of Us Part 1 is an essential remake that uses the sheer power at its disposal to make the best elements of the game even better. There's a scene around 15 minutes into The Last of Us, and if you've played the game you know which scene I'm referring to, that was the perfect case study as to why this game should exist. While the scene was sad on the PS3 and PS4, and it really set the tone for the powerful emotional heartstrings that were yet to be tugged throughout, on the PlayStation 5 it's practically unwatchable. Not only is the sequence itself horrific, but the reactions from Joel and Tommy are so heightened, so much more impactful and so realistic, that it felt like a milestone moment for performance capture in games, just like it did the first time. Parents will need to skip that scene. Everyone else will find themselves turning away or fighting with a significant lump in their throat. This is all thanks to the incredible strides that the game has made visually. At times, the difference between the PS4 version and the PS5 version of the game feels akin to Bluepoint's Demon's Souls remake, which straddled across 2 generations. And it's not in the sweeping city or the worn down interiors, which do look fantastic, but it's in the character models. Naughty Dog have been afforded so much more room to wordlessly convey the game's narrative and forming relationships that we feel like we're catching new threads of a game that we've played half a dozen times over a decade. The final narrative beat in The Last of Us asked players a simple question: does Ellie believe Joel? And while that was wonderfully handled in the original, and was a landmark for subtle storytelling in games, The Last of Us Part 1 adds to these moments and makes them even more significant. When it comes to gameplay, The Last of Us Part 1 lacks the improvements that made the second game so much better from a combat perspective, but the encounters are far more limited in Part 1, so the authentic combat mechanics work just as well. You'll ideally be avoiding resorting to firepower, especially on the harder difficulties, which is where The Last of Us shines. Stunning HDR and lighting effects make those quiet crawls past clickers in the dark even more terrifying than they've ever been. The game offers 2 modes, a fidelity option which targets 40 frames per second and offers all the visual bells and whistles that you'd expect from a modern PlayStation 5 game. We found that this was a fairly consistent way to play the game, apart from one instance where the player's flashlight interacts with water in a dark underground area. The cascading light and shadows were spectacular, but it caused the frame rate to take a brief respite from the action to accommodate the utter lighting wizardry. Although this was a very rare case, and you're more than likely not going to encounter any problems. The performance mode is absolutely rock solid and probably the way to play. For those with the screen to display it, there's even a 120 frames per second mode, which is interesting, but The Last of Us isn't a Twitch shooter, so it won't be used that often. It is clearly very easy to look at the product from the outside and say it's just graphics, and if you're looking for an itemized list of what is actually new in the game, fine, just graphics, but it misses the context of why a significant graphical improvement on The Last of Us would be so important. The thing that made The Last of Us such an impressive game was the galactic leaps that it made in performance capture and storytelling on the PS3 while it was on its dying days. This version of the game finally feels like it's conveying all of the sublime storytelling moments that it was always meant to, but technologically couldn't. There isn't a developer working today that can deliver these experiences quite like the utter mastery that Naughty Dog displays every time. but 70 quid is a steep mountain to climb. While the lack of multiplayer is a shame, as the original mode was highly underrated, Naughty Dog clearly have multiplayer aspirations that would far outshine remaking the game's original suite of multiplayer maps. But if you want to play the very best version of one of the greatest games that there has ever been, then The Last of Us Part 1 is a triumph. Not everyone needs to buy that Ultra HD Blu-ray of their favourite film, but there are some people that want that, and that is what this game is for. And in this case, the game doesn't only make the entire experience look generationally better than its last iteration, but it makes an already stellar story and unmatched performances even better. We give The Last of Us Part 1 5 out of 5.